okay? So, June 17th, 2026, Trump is standing in the Palace of Versailles in France, and he is signing a piece of paper, okay? And the moment that paper gets signed, the stock market explodes upward, oil prices crash down, and every major news channel in the world is running the same headline: peace deal, Iran, done. CNN says this is a triumph of diplomacy. Fox News says this is a betrayal. Tehran says this is a victory for Iran. And you know what? None of them are completely wrong. But all of them are asking the wrong question, okay? Because here is what nobody is asking. In the exact same 24 hours, in the exact same window of time, while Washington and Tehran were busy signing that piece of paper, while the cameras were pointed at Versailles, while analysts were arguing about whether Trump won or lost, there was one country thousands of miles away from France that did not fire a single bullet, did not sign a single document, did not send a single diplomat to Switzerland, and yet walked away from those 24 hours as the biggest winner in the entire story. That country is not Iran. It is not Russia. It is not Israel. It is China. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what China did in those 24 hours and why it matters far more than anything that happened in Versailles, okay? But I'm also going to show you something even more important. I'm going to show you that the agreement Trump just signed, the thing everyone is calling a peace deal, is actually the first phase of a longer plan. A plan that is designed deliberately to fall apart. And when it does fall apart, America is not going to go back in with bombs and aircraft carriers. They're going to go back in with rappers, with NGOs, with reconstruction money, with the exact same playbook they used in Bangladesh in 2024. All right, let us get into it. So to understand what is happening, you guys need to understand a concept, okay? A concept that I call the outside benefactor strategy. This is a game theory idea, and it is actually very simple. In a complex game, whether it is chess, business, geopolitics, whatever, the player who wins is almost never the one who fights the hardest. The player who wins is the one who lets the other players exhaust each other, and while they are busy fighting, this third player is quietly building a new position somewhere else. Okay? Let me give you an easy example. Imagine two restaurants on the same street. They are fighting each other hard, cutting prices, running ads, trying to steal each other's customers. They are both losing money. And then on the next block, a third restaurant opens quietly, hires better chefs, builds a better menu, expands. And within a year, they have taken all the customers from both of the fighting restaurants while those two were too busy looking at each other to notice. Okay? That is the outside benefactor strategy. And that is exactly what China executed on June 17th and 18th, 2026. Okay? Let me walk you through each move one by one. China's first move, they rewrote the rules of the world while nobody was looking. On the exact same day that Trump signed the Islamabad MOU at Versailles, China released a white paper. The full title is long, but the short version is this: the Global Governance Initiative, the GGI. Okay? Now, what is the GGI? The GGI is China's blueprint for a new world order. And I do not mean that in a vague or metaphorical way. I mean, they literally published a document that says, here are our principles for how the world should be governed, here are our proposals, and here are our actions. Okay? And this white paper was supported on that same day by nearly 160 countries. That is almost double the membership of NATO, guys. 160 nations. And the document explicitly rejects what it calls American unilateralism and hegemony. Okay? It says the world should be multipolar. It says no single country should be able to impose its rules on everyone else. Now you might say, well, China has been saying this for years. This is nothing new, all right? But here's what is new. On that same day, China did not just release a document. They announced 3 brand new international organizations. 3. Okay? The World AI Cooperation Organization, headquartered in Shanghai. The World Data Organization, headquartered in Beijing. And the International Mediation Organization, headquartered in Hong Kong. Does that make sense? Think about what that means. AI, data, international dispute resolution. These are the 3 pillars of geopolitical power in the 21st century. Whoever controls artificial intelligence, whoever controls data infrastructure, whoever controls the rules of international negotiation, that is who runs the world. Okay? And on the day that the entire world was watching a palace in France, China quietly planted its flag in all three of those pillars and put the headquarters on its own soil in one day. Okay? I want you to think about the strategic brilliance of this timing. America is at its most distracted dealing with the end of a war, managing oil prices, managing the stock market, managing domestic political pressure. And China chooses that exact moment to release the architectural blueprint for the next world order. That is not an accident, that is calculated. All right, China's second move. They started replacing the dollar as God. Now, on the same day, something else happened. Something that got almost zero coverage because everyone was looking at Versailles. In Shanghai, at a conference called the Lujiazui Forum, the governor of the People's Bank of China, Pan Gongsheng, made several major announcements, okay? First, he announced that foreign central banks and sovereign wealth funds will now be able to borrow Chinese yuan liquidity by using Chinese government bonds as collateral, okay? What does that mean? It means foreign governments can now access RMB financing directly without going through the dollar system. That is a big deal. Second, he announced that 6 of China's largest banks will be permitted to trade offshore RMB foreign exchange from within the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. This is the internationalization of the Chinese currency moving forward at a pace we have not seen before, okay? And third, Vice Premier He Lifeng announced that China will impose anti-sanctions measures against foreign entities that try to pressure Chinese companies. In other words, China is legally and institutionally building a wall against American financial pressure tools. They are not just resisting sanctions. They are making sanctions illegal from their perspective and backing that up with law. Now combine this with what happened in the trade negotiations, okay? Because of the inflation spike caused by the Hormuz blockade, which me could not afford, America agreed to something called the 30 for 30 deal. They proposed removing tariffs on $30 billion worth of quote-unquote non-sensitive Chinese imports, things like fireworks, cheap consumer goods. And American officials were forced to admit on a record that those manufacturing industries, quote, will never come back to America. Never. Analysts are calling this deal a grand bargain on China's terms because China gave nothing, no concessions on industrial subsidies, no concessions on the trade imbalance, which was already $202 billion in 2025. China just sat still, let America beg, and collected. Does that make sense? Okay, the most powerful country in the world just walked into a negotiating room under economic pressure and gave away $30 billion in tariff concessions without getting a single structural reform in return. That is not strength, that is desperation. And China knows it. China's third move. They surpassed America in science while America's economy was being strangled by high interest rates. All right, and this third one is the most underreported of all, okay? Because while Washington was managing the political fallout of the Iran deal, the Nature Index, the world's most credible ranking of scientific research output, released its latest data showing that China has now overtaken the United States and claimed the #1 position globally in chemistry with 53% of total global output. Let that number sit for a second. 53%, okay? And not just chemistry. China is also leading in physical sciences and applied sciences, and in biopharma, pharmaceutical biotechnology. Chinese companies like In Silico Medicine are using AI to compress drug development timelines from years to months. At the same time, on June 17th, the U.S. Federal Reserve, under its new chairman Kevin Warsh, announced it is holding interest rates at 3.5 to 3.75%. The signal was clear. Rates are staying high for a long time. The official phrase was higher for longer, okay? Now, what does high interest rates mean in practice? It means the cost of borrowing goes up for American businesses. Investment slows down. Research and development budgets shrink. The competitiveness of American companies weakens. And while all that's happening to America, China is investing heavily in scientific breakthroughs that will define the next generation of the global economy, okay? Let me just say this one more time slowly. China did not start this war. China did not fight in this war. China did not send troops to the Persian Gulf. China did not lose any aircraft carriers. China did not spend trillions of dollars on munitions. And in the exact 24 hours, while America was signing a peace deal that many analysts are calling the worst foreign policy blunder in decades, China rewrote the rules of global governance, started dismantling the dollar's dominance, forced trade concessions out of a weakened America, and surpassed America in multiple fields of science. Not a single bullet, not a single signed document, just 3 quiet moves while the other players were busy looking at each other. That is the outside benefactor strategy in action, okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right, now I want to add another dimension to this, okay? Because everything I just showed you, China, the dollar, GGI, that is the outside story. That is what is happening beyond Iran's borders. But there is another story, a story happening inside Iran. And to understand that story, I need to ask you one question. Does America actually want peace with Iran? I'm going to argue, no, not real peace. And I want to show you why from the structure of the agreement itself, the 60-day trap. This is a concept I want you to carry with you, the 60-day trap, okay? Look at the actual content of the Islamabad MOU. The nuclear clause requires Iran to dilute its highly enriched uranium, what experts call HEU, on-site, inside Iran, under supervision from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. Sounds reasonable, right? Okay? But here's the problem. Iran has publicly stated that they do not consider the IAEA to be a neutral arbitrator. Their words, not mine. Ray Taki, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, not some conspiracy theorist, one of America's most respected Iran analysts, said on the record that if Iran maintains this position about the IAEA, then any nuclear agreement simply cannot be adequately verified. Okay? And Iran is not going to ship its uranium out of the country. They agreed only to dilute it in place under their own conditions, on their own timeline, at facilities they control. That creates a verification gap so large you could drive a battleship through it, okay? And the Americans know this. The CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Secretary of State Marco Rubio both told Trump, privately and publicly, that they have serious doubts about whether Iran will actually comply with the nuclear commitments, okay? These are not critics of Trump saying this. These are his own people. Now, what did Trump say in response to all of this? This is important, okay? Trump said, and I am quoting him directly, quote, "If they don't come through, is it a threat that we'd bomb? You could call it whatever you want, but it'll probably happen," end quote. He said this at the G7 summit in France on the same day he signed the deal, okay? And US officials told reporters, not off the record, directly, that if Iran is seen as stalling or deceiving them, the US will, quote, "very quickly pull the plug and go back to squeezing them in the most aggressive way possible," end quote, okay? So let me make sure I am understanding this correctly, and you guys tell me if this makes sense. You sign an agreement with someone, you know the verification mechanism will not work because the other side does not trust the referee. You include a 60-day deadline with a bomb threat attached to it. And your own intelligence officials are telling you the other side will probably cheat. That is not a peace deal, that is a trap with a nice bow on it, okay? The MOU exists to serve one short-term purpose: reopen the Strait of Hormuz, stop the oil shock, save the stock market, and buy time. That is it. After 60 days, when Iran fails to satisfy verification demands, it was never going to satisfy. America has a perfect, internationally legitimate reason to declare Iran in violation and trigger a new wave of pressure. But here is what I want to argue to you now. The next wave of pressure is not going to look like bombs, okay? Because bombs have already been proven too expensive, too slow, and incapable of achieving the real objective. The next wave is going to look like something America has done before, something much quieter, something that has already been tested and proven to work. Bangladesh, 2024. The Steelman argument first, because you deserve to hear it. Now, before I explain Bangladesh, I want to do something, okay? I want to Steelman the argument against what I am about to say. I do not ever want you guys to just accept what I tell you without thinking critically. So let me present the strongest possible counter-argument. The counter-argument goes like this. Iran is not Bangladesh. Iran has China and Russia behind it. It has the CRINC alliance. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. During the entire blockade and sanctions period, China continued buying Iranian oil just at a discount. Iran has a 25-year cooperation agreement with China. It is integrating its banking system with Russia. Iran survived everything America threw at it. So why would a soft power approach work now when hard power has already failed? This argument is genuinely strong and it has historical support. I have to acknowledge that. Okay? But here is what that argument cannot account for. 3 things. 1, Bangladesh also had India standing behind it, a much larger neighbor, sharing a long border with 15 years of deep political ties to Sheikh Hasina's government. India did not want to lose Bangladesh. India was paying close attention, and Bangladesh still fell, okay? External protection is not an absolute shield when the enemy is attacking from the inside. 2, China's priority right now is the GGI. It is 160 nations. It is the global governance architecture China has spent years building. China needs international stability, including a working relationship with the West, to make that vision succeed. China is not going to sacrifice the GGI to protect the Iranian regime. And we can see this in how Beijing responded to the Iran MOU. They welcomed it and called for pragmatic negotiations. Not one word of criticism against America. Not one word of defense for Iran. That is calculated silence. That is China saying, we are fine with this because it serves our interests. 3, and this is the most important point. America does not need to use hard power to collapse Iran. They do not need to fire a single bomb because they already have a playbook that works. A playbook they tested in Bangladesh and it worked beautifully. And that playbook does not leave fingerprints that can be traced back to Washington. Okay? Bangladesh 2024. Let me tell you what actually happened. August 2024, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who had led Bangladesh for 15 years, who had built one of the fastest growing economies in South Asia, fled her own country within a matter of hours. Okay? From the outside, it looked like a spontaneous student uprising, protests, revolution, democracy. And yes, there were real grievances. I'm not saying that people had no legitimate complaints, okay? But I want you to look at the infrastructure behind the uprising, because the infrastructure tells a different story. USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED, which a former CIA officer once publicly called a co-conspirator of the CIA, funneled millions of dollars into Bangladesh through Bangladesh organizations like the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute. In February 2021, a USAID-funded think tank published a document literally titled The Disinformation Primer. Okay? The stated purpose was to fight misinformation. But if you read the actual content, it outlines strategies for controlling information flow, coordinating with tech companies to suppress government narratives, and amplifying opposition voices. Okay? That is not fighting disinformation. That is engineering it. And here is the part that I think is most remarkable. Okay? They did not just fund politicians. They funded artists, musicians. A lawyer and rapper named Tawfiq Ahmed was given funding to produce music videos with titles like You Can Do It and Make Your Demands, which then went viral on Facebook and YouTube, specifically targeting urban youth, specifically designed to mobilize young people to take to the streets. Okay? Think about the genius of this for a moment. You do not need a political pamphlet. You do not need a formal opposition party. You just need a song that plays on a 20-year-old student's phone enough times, and you have done your work. Okay? They also ran a program called Pairs from 2019 to 2020. And the targeting strategy of Pairs is very revealing. They did not target generals. They did not target senators. They targeted marginalized communities. The LGBTQI plus community, ethnic minorities like the Bihari people, students. Okay? The reasoning was explicit. These groups are harder for the government to suppress, and they are effective at spreading reform messages to wider audiences. They interviewed 304 informants and identified 170 quote-unquote democracy activists who were willing to cooperate, and the money was flowing. $270 million to the East-West Management Institute alone. Okay? The result, Sheikh Hasina fled. Muhammad Yunus, a man with close ties to American elite institutions, took power, and Bangladesh entered what I call structured anarchy. The police force collapsed. Mob violence spread. Hundreds of lynchings occurred. Islamist extremist groups surged in power. And Washington got exactly what it wanted, a friendly face in the chair, surrounded by enough chaos to justify continued American presence and influence. Okay? Now let me connect every single dot to Iran, because this is where it gets very important. The Bangladesh model is being prepared for Iran right now. Article 2 of the Islamabad MOU says the United States will not interfere in Iran's internal affairs. Okay, great. But here's the thing about that clause. An AD is not official interference. USAID is not official interference. NGOs are not official interference. A $300 billion reconstruction fund flowing through private channels and nonprofits is not official interference. Okay? These are the exact same mechanisms used in Bangladesh, and they all operate in the space between official government action and completely deniable private activity. I want to highlight two specific details that I think are critical. Okay? First detail. Elliot Abrams, former senior U.S. security official, former Trump special envoy for Iran, publicly criticized the MOU specifically because he called it a complete abandonment of the democracy movement inside Iran. He explicitly referenced America's historical support for dissidents like Andrei Sakharov and Anatoly Sharansky inside the Soviet Union and asked why Iran should be any different. Okay? Now, some people will read that as just a conservative politician complaining about a bad deal. But I want you to read it differently. Okay? Abrams is not just expressing frustration, he is sending a signal to the people in the intelligence and foreign policy community who know how to read it, that the abandonment is the cover story. The public deal says do not interfere. The private signal says the covert infrastructure should continue. Okay? The clause gives America a legal defense later when someone accuses them of meddling. We sign a document saying we would not. Okay? That is very convenient. Second detail. The $300 billion reconstruction fund. Trump specifically said this money will not come from American taxpayers. It will come from regional countries and private sector investment. Okay? So who controls the disbursement chains? Who decides which projects get funded? Which NGOs channel the money? Which local organizations receive grants? This is exactly the mechanism used with the $270 million that flowed through the East-West Management Institute in Bangladesh. The money comes in and the influence follows. Okay? Now look at the raw material already inside Iran. Okay? America does not need to import friction. There's plenty already there. The women's rights movement that exploded during the 2025 to 2026 protests, the Kurdish minority in the north, urban youth who have been living under economic collapse during the blockade, young people who are already angry, already online, already looking for someone to blame. And most importantly, the deep political fracture inside the Iranian government itself. Because when the MOU was announced, Iranian hardliners in the Majlis immediately called it, quote, rushed and weak, and accused the government of abandoning the supreme leader's red lines. Okay? You have a government that signed a deal half its own political establishment hates. That is a fault line you can push on, hard. And the real target, let me be clear about this, the real target is not the elected government of President Pezeshkian. Okay? Pezeshkian is a reformist. He wants the deal. He wants the sanctions lifted. He wants the reconstruction money. The real target is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Okay? The IRGC is the actual backbone of the Iranian regime. They control the axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq. Destroy the IRGC's domestic legitimacy, fragment its political power, and you collapse the entire regional network without firing a single weapon. Okay? And you do not need bombs to do that. You need money. You need musicians. You need student movements. You need NGOs. You need 170 trained activists, a viral social media campaign, and 60 days of a ceasefire as cover. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. This is what I mean when I say this is not a peace deal. This is phase one of a longer operation. The MOU bought time. It opened the strait, stopped the oil shock, and gave America domestic political cover. Now phase two begins quietly, invisibly, deniably, the same way it began in Bangladesh. And if it works the same way it worked in Bangladesh, in a year or two from now, you will turn on the news and see Iran in the middle of a, quote, spontaneous youth uprising, and nobody in Washington will have officially done anything wrong. I'm not saying this is 100% certain, okay? I want to be very clear about that. This is a theoretical framework. This is my analysis based on the available evidence. I could be completely wrong. But when you see the same playbook, the same organizations, the same funding mechanisms, the same targeting of marginalized groups, the same media strategy used in multiple countries across multiple administrations. At some point, it stops being a coincidence and starts being a pattern. Okay? All right. So here is what to watch in the next 60 days. Specifically, I am not going to give you vague predictions. I am going to give you 3 concrete specific things to monitor. Okay? And you can come back in 60 days and tell me if I was right or wrong. I genuinely want you to challenge me on this. First thing to watch. Pay attention to whether Iran allows IAEA inspectors into its nuclear facilities, and specifically under what conditions. Iran has already said they do not view the IAEA as neutral. If Iran places restrictions on inspectors, limits on which sites they can visit, requirements for advance notice, restrictions on sample collection, watch how the US responds. If Washington frames those restrictions as a treaty violation, that is the trigger. That is the moment the 60-day trap snaps shut. Read IAEA statements directly. Do not rely on US government summaries of them. They will say different things. Second thing to watch. Watch for NGO registration and activity inside Iran. Specifically, any USAID affiliated, NED affiliated, or IRA affiliated organizations beginning to request operating permits or establishing partnerships with Iranian civil society groups. They will call it humanitarian assistance. They will call it reconstruction support. They will call it educational exchange. But if you saw the Bangladesh documents and now you know what the infrastructure of a soft power operation looks like before it activates. Okay? Third thing to watch, China. Specifically, watch how many additional countries formally join or endorse the GGI in the next 60 days. If China expands its coalition while America is distracted managing the Iran process, that is the clearest possible evidence that the outside benefactor strategy is producing exactly the results Beijing planned for. And it will tell you something important, that the real long-term power shift is not happening in the Persian Gulf. It is happening in the diplomatic and economic architecture being quietly assembled in Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong. June 17th and 18th, 2026. 24 hours. China launches the GGI with 160 nations, establishes 3 international organizations, and claims the architecture of the next world order. China forces a $30 billion tariff concession from a weakened America that is desperate to stop inflation. China opens the Lujiazui Forum and takes concrete steps to internationalize the yuan and build a financial system that bypasses the dollar. The Federal Reserve holds rates at 3.75%, under the shadow of energy inflation, strangling American business investment. China surpasses America in scientific output across multiple fields. Meanwhile, Iran signs a verification deal it cannot fulfill with a referee it does not trust under a 60-day deadline with a bomb threat attached. In the background, the institutional machinery that turned Bangladesh from a stable government into a friendly client state in 6 months, USAID, NED, the disinformation primer, the Paris program, the wrapper strategy is quietly being calibrated for a much larger, much more strategically significant country. One nation walked away from those 24 hours having won without fighting. One agreement was designed to fail so that a different, quieter war could begin. And one historical blueprint from 2024 is being prepared for reuse in 2026. And I want to leave you with one final question. Okay? Not an answer, just a question. Because I think it is the most important question in the entire story. When America promises $300 billion to rebuild Iran, but has already prepositioned the same organizations, the same funding channels, and the same civil society infiltration infrastructure it used in Bangladesh, the real question is not whether Iran will be rebuilt. The real question is who will be governing Iran when that rebuilding is finished. Think about that. All right, and I will see you guys in the next one.